We live in the era of the slasher, and that is the one unending nightmare from which we cannot turn away in our world today. But that horror of constant genocidal violence targeting people for their very existence is restaged and restaged also in order for us to turn away from the even more undoing horror of climate change, which is hard to think about today. We create our own horrors in order to obfuscate a horror we find even more difficult to accept, how the world is falling apart without our control. So we find something terrible to do that is within our control and focus on that. But we still have to deal with that huge horror too. We have to dispel that nightmare in order to get at the other nightmare. The figure that comes to mind with the slasher is Jason. He's the real monster with the mask and his unstoppable drive. But what we get with these Friday the 13th films that's useful here is how people actually try to stop Jason, and how do we apply that in our world today? Like, how do we deal with an unstoppable force, these governments that are out committing atrocities that we voice our rejection of, and that doesn't change enough. So it's not to say that we stop voicing things, but how do we wrestle with an unstoppable monster? That's the real pressure here. With Jason in the Friday the 13th films, they are not these puritanical stagings of obliterating sexuality that people tend to think they are. So Jason was a boy who drowned when his camp counselors were off getting lucky, and so his slashing is primarily focused on all these kids who in these forests are trying to get lucky, and then while they're trying to get lucky, they go for a break and get knifed in the back by Jason constantly. But you can't imagine a Puritan watching these films. The staging of the sexuality is open, and these characters are enjoying it. A Puritan is a fundamentalist who would burn these films, who would sever themselves off from the enjoyment of these kids entirely. But it's not a hypocritical staging as well that you would get in explicitly evangelicalism or Catholicism, where you say no, but you have these secret ways of, this is how you can secretly enjoy things, bend the rules, break the rules, this allowed way kind of a thing. Because the thing that we have anxiety towards isn't the constant spinning wheels of all of these characters who show up, say something obscene or do something sexual, and then get offed instantly. Because it's a huge body count. Like there's not much room for character for the most part. What we're concerned with is how we stop Jason. Not because we're afraid of Jason, but because it's this open question of how do you stop this character who literally cannot die, and for the most part is not even being confronted. They try to make characters confront him in the 90s, but in the 80s he's constantly knifing people in the back who don't even know he's there. And the people who are able to confront Jason are those who aren't even really wrestling with him directly. So it's the formation of a couple. The early films deal with the final girl, but for the most part, all of these films keep dealing with couples, whether they're siblings or potential love interests, but they don't, fall in love. So the couple is necessary because we aren't dealing with this brutal struggle in which we are just persisting against that which is coming to destroy us, because Jason is just too powerful there. Like it's a bit hard to imagine that final girl confrontation with the figure of Jason. It's always about, you can stop him, but he's going to keep coming, kind of a thing. With the couple, what we're dealing with is the ability to break off into the world and leave this infinite play of Jason's constant destruction. And so you need, both sides of people there, like a man and a woman primarily, but obviously couples can take any form. So the couples in these films are really detectives trying to figure out some way to drill into Jason's own position in order to properly bury him the way he should have been buried, into the lake. So most of these endings we get in these films is about putting Jason back in the lake one way or another, or we enter Jason's own position by the kid who shaves his head and basically says, "I'm Jason," to short circuits Jason's unending drive to destroy. Or we somehow restage the trauma of drowning in the lake again with Jason, and that somehow works. That somehow gets him back in the lake again. So it's not a matter of recognition and being like, we understand your pain, Jason, even though there's a little voicing of that in these films sometimes. It's really a matter of properly reburying what needs to stay buried, but of course gets kicked up again for the next film. And in the 90s, they try to say, okay, enough is enough. Let's just find a way to truly annihilate this body, because in the 80s there's a beautiful persistence of the body of Jason throughout these films, where we end Jason, but we see that we pick off where we left off with the next film, and we find a way in which he rises back up again. And that's a real value to these films. That's what makes Jason an interesting figure. And then they end Jason entirely with acid, or with this weird hell ghost thing, or space burning, all these weird things. But Jason still persists anyway, not because of bad writing, but because this ghostly element of Jason is a struggle we have ourselves by virtue of being subjects who desire. Because the neighbor figure of Jason, this mask that puts his desire onto us in an annihilating way, is just fundamental to human existence itself, because we are desiring subjects. That by virtue of being desiring subjects, we are traumatized by other people's desire, and that desire is something that we form ourselves against, like in the world of. So we are not psychotically these people who aren't connected to the world. We are connected to other people via desire. So in this primal sense, you have the child who is concerned about being the object of his mother's desire. And so with the classic situation with Jason drowning in the lake, he's not the object of desire of those counselors. So we have a child lashing out in the world, being like, why don't you desire me? I need to find a way in order to make myself the object of your desire. And if I can't do that, then I'm going to slash you. That's what's fundamentally at work in slashing itself, and what keeps it from being sadism. Because in sadism, the real target is trying to keep myself from being the target of desire. I annihilate people in order to prove that people can be annihilated, that the desire that they have themselves and put on me can be quashed. And then I get this sort of cosmic satisfaction out of it that turns me into something makes me into a rock. Makes me into a thing that can't be desired. But what's most applicable about the Friday the 13th films to our world today, in which we have these genocidal military monstrosities out committing unending violence, is that we target the footing that allows for these monstrosities to exist. So it's not the psyche, what's going on in the heads of these military people who are stuck in these fantasies of enjoying destroying people for their very existence. Like, we're too far gone there. It's useless to target that. What we need to target is the footing by which the rest of the world accepts that. That says, it's too bad, but, it's the but there. But isn't it better for there to be states where the ethnicity is all the same? So we wipe out the minority, or we wipe out the little guy, but once we've done that, then things will be okay for the world. That's unacceptable. That's completely wrong, and that's what feeds the enjoyment of the monstrosities that we have to struggle with in our world today. So with the Jason films, it's the footing that gets his gears running in this infinite loop that they target. It's not what's going on inside Jason's head. It's about his own structure, his stance. And so when we watch these films, which are this very clear-cut cycle of Jason goes off and annihilates people, and then we find a way to stop it, we are trying to find a way to stop Jason, and that's how you stop Jason. So we're drilling into Jason's position, but we're not trying to get into his head and show him how he's wrong. And we're not just self-flagellating with how are we involved, how are we the ones really responsible either. What we're drilling into by drilling into Jason's position is how it affects the whole world, the stance of the world itself. And we are destroying the structures that support what Jason's doing. That's the thing we have to target. The proper avenue here should be political, but politics is in a very tenuous state in our world today, and we have to keep persisting there.